All right, welcome back. And we got a banger today. So we're going to be talking about everything that you need to know about all 8 Mythic Plus dungeons for Season 3 of The War Within to make you just that much of a better Mythic Plus player. And we have an excellent dungeon pool for this season. We have Tazavesh returning with both Streets and Gambit. We have Halls of Atonement coming back from Shadowlands as well. Eco Dome Aldani, a brand new dungeon to the Ghosts of Koresh patch. And then we also have 4 War Within dungeons that you, the viewers, have voted on, which were Dawnbreaker, Ara-Kara, Floodgate, and Priory the Sacred Flame. So what I'm planning on doing is this video is meant to be like right before you go into the dungeon, you throw on this video and you kind of learn what you need to know about the dungeon. Maybe if you played in Season 1, I'm going to be talking about what's changed about the dungeons. If you've never necessarily even played in these dungeons, I'm also going to make sure that there's enough information, tips, tricks, whatever you're going to need to know about the dungeons that are going to make you a better Mythic Plus player. And if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure you like and subscribe, as this does take me a while to make. In addition to that as well, I'm going to be putting out more Mythic Plus content to help you be the best Mythic Plus player you can possibly be. And so without further ado, let's get into the video. Now, the first starting point, we have to talk about the most important thing to everybody, the things that play the game for all of us. Add-ons, of course. There are a couple of add-ons that I recommend tier in and tier out. I tend to run bigwigs. Whenever we're talking about just like raid boss add-ons that are fairly solid, bigwigs tends to be the one that is the best for Mythic Plus. It does require the companion app Little Wigs to be able to get all of the timers and everything for Mythic Plus. If there are specific dungeon mobs or dungeon bosses that you want a siren on, or if you end up wanting like a beep sound whenever a specific mechanic is going on, I think that bigwigs and little wigs are superb. In addition to that as well, bigwigs has added functionality to allow you to have timers on nameplates, which I think is one of the most overpowered things that you can actually be doing in the game. And so by having these timers on the nameplates, you can actually tell when a cooldown of an ability is up for a mob and allow you to have more perfect information whenever you're just doing the dungeon itself. And for weak auras, I kind of recommend the same thing every single season. Terathal releases an excellent pack to kind of help you as a player be able to learn how to deal with the dungeons. Both of these things are going to be linked down in the description as well, so you can kind of check these out for yourself. Terathal's pack, I think, helps you learn how to do the dungeons better, whether it be with auditory cues, whether it be with weak auras that just help him as a player improve, so they'll be sure to help you as a player improve as well. Those are probably the two big ones. Other pretty good add-ons that I think are fairly solid are things like Omni CD or Method Raid tools. I do end up using those in some capacity, whether it be for tracking CCs or tracking defensives or those kind of things. But those I think are a little bit more optional. I think if we're looking for like just baseline, big wigs, little wigs, and the Terathal weak aura pack are probably a really good starting point. But if you really want to start to get into more advanced stuff, I think Omni CD and potentially Method Raid tools as well, and like kick trackers and CC and CD tracking, that kind of stuff does come with a little bit more advanced play. Okay, let's start talking about the dungeons. So we have the Tazaveshes first, and we're going to be starting off by talking about Gambito. So Gambit is a returning dungeon from Shadowlands. It was a mega dungeon, it is also attached to Streets of Wonder. And the first area in Tazavesh Gambit, if you played it back in Shadowlands, it feels honestly pretty similar. So all the Murlocs, they're going to flee whenever they reach low HP. That means that they can and pretty frequently do go and pull their friends. So effects like Ursul's Vortex, Ring of Peace, Binding Shot, any CC realistically, an AoE slow perhaps, like Piercing Howl, can be very effective against these Murlocs whenever they're looking to run away. Now, we have very specific mobs that are in this first area, and their assortment is, they might show up in different orientations and packs, but these are the main mobs that you're going to find in the first area. First is the Shell Crusher. It does a Cry of Murgler, which is an enrage effect that goes on the entire pack. It's something that you're going to want to kind of kick. Otherwise, your tank's going to be taking a bunch of damage. There is a Fishmancer mob. That mob is just a generic X-Bolt type caster. There is the Scale Binder, which is arguably the most important mob in this area. And it drops an ability called Invigorating Fish Stick. If you're familiar with this dungeon, this is probably one of the most iconic abilities in this dungeon. It is a 25% AoE DR, and it heals the mobs. There are specific ways that you can counteract this. Previously, you could CC it, but I think that got removed with the recent patch. As of course, you probably should know this with this video. Maybe you should have said this at the very beginning, but there are things that can get changed over the course of time through Blizzard just changing the dungeons. You could previously stop the fish stick. That's no longer a thing that you can do. Now, the only other ways to counteract it are by killing off the fish stick itself. You can maybe go and download a plater script and change the color of the invigorated fish stick to make sure that you're able to target it. Alternatively, you can drag the mobs away. This is largely what we did during the PTR, is we would just drag the mobs 20 and 30 yards away from the invigorating fish stick just to make sure that the mobs weren't getting that AoE DR and were getting pulsed on by that invigorating fish stick. And then the last mob that's kind of important that's in this area is the Goliath. He has a large AoE hit with a tidal stomp ability. You want to do these mobs sometimes. I don't think they're a bunch of they're not like good mobs to do back to back. You don't want to be playing 2 Goliaths at once. But they are a pretty decent count, particularly whenever you're looking for like the first pull of the dungeon with Bloodlust. Being able to down one of those Goliaths, there's specific compositions with specific specializations like Arcane Mage with their funnel, Aldrachi Reaver, Havoc Demon Hunter. Those kind of specs are really good at being able to kind of turn this AoE into single target damage. And so those Goliaths can be good, but your mileage may vary. So you don't really want to pull a ton of them, probably like 2. I would wager a guess. And you want to get a decent amount of count in this first area as well, just to set yourself up quite nicely for the future. Now, the next boss, we have Hilbrand. He is very similar to what he was back in Shadowlands. I'm not going to really try to reference how the bosses were back in the olden days. I'm going to try to just continue to talk about these older dungeons as if you've never played them before. But he's largely similar. He has a Purification Burst that is a cast that you should be looking to DR as frequently as possible. He also summons ads that will try to cast an ability on him. Those should be CC'd to make sure that they don't actually end up shielding the boss for a DR. They will also cast like a bolt cast, so make sure that you interrupt that. Yeah, and then there is the console. The console has been changed. So the console in the past was a weird mechanic where it was like a weak ore mechanic where you'd have to have a weak ore that would you would click it and it would tell your party, kind of similar to the Mystic Scythe Maze, where they were supposed to be dropping off their balls. That's mostly gone. The main thing is that 4 people are going to be picking up these colored orbs and trying to run them to their consoles. And you on that main console, you must click and hold the channel on the console. Otherwise, it does remove that effect. Otherwise, if you end up canceling it, it has a lockout period. I think the lockout period is a little bit shorter than it was in earlier iterations of PTR, but it still does have a little bit of a lockout period. So you really want to click and hold that channel on the console to be able to show all the colors to your party. The second area, I would describe the second area as largely tank damage heavy. The deckhands, those mobs will enrage themselves. So if your tank is a little bit fragile during that kind of point, they can be looking to kite. The Tide Sages are generic caster mobs that are kind of in this area. But the mobs, I think, kind of telegraph what they're doing pretty consistently to the point where there's not a lot that's really going on here. I mean, you need to really make sure that you're kicking the Tide Sages. Your tank needs to make sure that he's watching out for the deckhands, but that's about it. The officers, I think they also have a bleed. You'll see circles on players. Do not stack those circles. That is the officer trying to throw a ricocheting blade onto people, and if there are multiple people inside of it, then they get hit. Second boss, Time Captain Hooktail. This guy sucks. I need to add this in post. So basically, there is a way that you should be looking to move this boss that is correct. So the tank should take the inside track. This kind of feels very Yasma-esque if you played back in Dragonflight Season 3, where you really want to move the boss around on the inside track, and you want to have your range DPS and your melee DPS stacked up together alongside the wall and kind of moving parallel to one another, continuing to be able to hit Time Captain Hooktail, but making sure that you're baiting the fire. So there's a lot of fire on this fight. In addition to that, what that allows you to do is that allows your tank to be able to bait the infinite breath a lot easier. And so there is a conal ability and ads that spawn every so often. So the ads, if they don't get hit by the conal ability, they're basically mobs that you can't kill off. They end up getting a stacking speed and haste buff as they persist. So you really want to make sure that your tank has a good line to be able to kill those. And the best way of doing that is just making sure that you stack up and move along the wall together. There's also a very challenging mechanic on this fight, which is a debuff, and it's a plus haste effect debuff, and whenever you dispel it off of players, it pulses for a large AoE. So the healer tends to immediately dispel one, for global one of them just gets dispelled off the players. Then the healer is able to top the rest of the group up, and by the time his dispel comes back up, then he is able to press that again. The person who has the debuff is going to have haste for the duration of that debuff, and it is not an insignificant amount of haste, so you're kind of happy to have that debuff whenever this happens. The final mechanic is an Anchor Toss ability, which is an insanely hard-hitting ability that will drag you. There's specifically weird overlaps where the fire barrage can happen at the exact same time that you get hit with an Anchor Toss, and so you can die. In addition to that as well, if you get killed by an anchor toss while you have a debuff as well, you're going to immediately explode the debuff. There's a lot of situations where if you end up seeing the anchor toss like text on your screen from the default game, you need to be pressing a DR immediately. It is incredibly imperative that you're going to be pressing a DR, otherwise you're going to be dying to this anchor toss. This anchor toss hits you really hard. This fight is incredibly challenging in my opinion. Probably one of the hardest bosses on the season, which is kind of strange. Third area, we got Star Seers. So you can actually skip these Star Seers with Mind Soothe. I don't think I have any B-roll footage of me skipping them with Mind Soothe. Alternatively, you could just play one of them with some of the trash mobs. It's kind of important that you end up killing off these pulsar orbs. By killing off these pulsar orbs, that will basically just like reduce the damage that you take. Now, you can outrange them, but it's not really a thing. So you really just need to make sure that you're killing off these pulsars. So it's like everybody should be like hard target swapping to them. The last mob is the Ritualist, which the Ritualist has 2 casts. It is a Hyperlight Bolt cast, which is just, again, a generic caster, random target bolt cast. And then the Unstable Rift. The Unstable Rift is a group-wide AoE one-shot that must get kicked. It is a little bit of a longer cast. So a lot of situations, you'll press a bunch of CCs on them, and then kind of similar to Alchemists, maybe in Motherload, then you'll press kicks on that. If you let an Unstable Rift go off, you're going to be annoyed, and then for a really bad time. Final boss, Celia. So Celia is a 2-phase encounter where the first phase has assassins, where you end up just like kick the assassins. You can also Ursul's Vortex them back into melee range, and it will completely cancel their cast. Alternatively, if you don't want to kick them, you can just CC them to be able to cancel their cast and they don't recast. There's also another global mechanic that is always present on this fight, which is Collapsing Star. It's kind of similar to Sacrificial Pyre, if you really think about it, from the Priory of the Sacred Flame, where you end up having to soak this puddle that's in the middle of the room, and it puts a dot onto all 5 party members. So it's a little bit different than Sacrificial Pyre that way. There is kind of the question as to who's supposed to soak. It tends to want to be like a ranged DPS. There are some instances where you can have your healer go soak. You're probably not supposed to have your healer go soak. They're supposed to be probably ramping on the group and healing them. But I would say under most circumstances, you should have a mobile ranged DPS like a mage, like a hunter, potentially even like a warlock, go and do that soak to be able to get that dealt with on the players. So you get the boss in the first phase to 40%, and the boss phase is to phase 2. There's a question. Where are we supposed to position this? A lot of people like to put it in the corner. Let me present you option number 2. You put the boss up on the stage. And the reason that you put the boss up on the stage is fairly simple. And Blizzard is probably going to be watching this video, and they're probably going to fix this because I'm talking about it. But the stars, they go underneath the stairs. So if you tank the boss on the stage, you don't have to dodge the stars at all, making it a very, very, very trivial mechanic. So there's the Hyperlight Jolt that happens right as you go into the intermission for phase 2, and you need to really make sure that you're positioning around the relic stars. So what happens is like there are these arrows on your people. You just need to really make sure that the arrow that's coming towards you is passing through a star before you deal with it. I think that pinging your own individual relic that you're going to be looking to go to, and do like the on the way ping, if you like hold down the ping button and like swipe it to the right, that can ping on the way. I think that will actually be able to appropriately tell like your group who is going to where and where you want to be going. Also, Celia has a 99% DR during that phase, so don't feel like you have to be hitting the boss. I know melee DPS just get caught up in trying to do damage all the time, and they feel like they're obligated, and they, God forbid, they can't actually hit the boss for 5 seconds, but the boss has a DR, so don't worry about that. The final thing is the energy fragmentation, which was kind of what I was talking about earlier, where the relics shoot out the stars. That's why we want to tank the boss on the stage again. So the relics shoot out orbs going in all different directions. All right, Tazavesh Streets. We got very long dungeon, 5-boss dungeon. Let's talk about the first area. So the first area, there are 2 mini bosses that you're going to have to fight at various points, and they're very similar mobs. It's Gate Warden Zomaz and Portal Guardian Zohan, and they have largely similar mechanics. Radiant Pulse is the main mechanic that these mobs do. It is a large dot that gets put onto players. Depending on the dungeon level, it can do upwards of like 200% of your HP, maybe even like 300% of your HP over a very short period of time. So it's an incredibly, incredibly dangerous dot that your healer needs to be aware of. Now, you can LOS this dot, and what you're going to see is the Portal Guardian that spawns the boss. It is very easy to LOS him consistently. Gate Warden, there are positions in which you can actually LOS this boss. Nobody was really doing it on the PTR because you had all of your defensives, you had all of your healing cooldowns. You didn't really need to kind of deal with that because you were only getting 1 AoE go off. But hypothetically, once you get to higher level keys, maybe look to explore some different positions where you can tank Gate Warden to be able to LOS it. Other mobs that are in the first area that you need to know about. The support officer has a refraction shield mechanic. It is basically like a damage reflect. It must be purged. That mechanic can be the highest amount of damage that you take for the entirety of the dungeon, and it's just in the first area if you're not super careful. Having a purge and having somebody that's very diligent about purging those mobs is incredibly valuable. This is the first time in forever that I've seen Blood Elf actually be useful. Other mobs, they're Overseers, and they are insane tank damage, and they have a rotating beam that you end up being able to jump over. I think their tank damage actually ended up getting recently nerfed. Yeah, so their proxy strike, which is that magic damage shot that I was talking about, did get nerfed a little bit on some recent PTR cycles, but it didn't get nerfed on the damage that it's dealing. So really, really watch out for these Overseers. They can kill off tanks rather quickly if you're not super prepared, particularly things like Protection Warrior. If you're not playing around, taking this large one-shot hit that's magic damage, you can die. First boss is Ophex. He has a couple of mechanics. He has Impound Contraband, which is a mechanic that will silence you. You pick up your weapon, then you end up getting a damage amp. The higher that you go on this dungeon, it can one-shot you. We were getting one-shot in around 15s to 16s on the PTR at 7-10 item level. This is kind of the situation where obviously it depends on the dungeon level, depends on your item level of your character, but this can one-shot you if you're not careful. The other main mechanic is the interrogation and detainment mechanic, where interrogation and detainment, basically you get targeted by the detainment cast and you get put in a cage where you're just stunned until you either get broken out or the boss kills you off. Interrogation is basically the boss fixates you and starts whirling up his blades and he walks towards you, and then eventually he'll either catch you and you'll die, or your group will break you out. You want to probably be like 40, 50, 60 yards away from the boss. There are ways that you can actually get out of the detainment, though. As I stated earlier, it's a stun. AMS, Icebound Fortitude, Blink, pre-spell warding, any immunity. Those things can actually stop you from getting hit by the detainment. In the past, we used free action potions. Blizzard hated that shit and they removed it, so now you're going to be stunned. It's very similar to maybe, let's say, Soulbound Goliath, if you guys play Dragonflight Season 3 again. It's really obnoxious. It is the core mechanic of the fight, so be very cautious about the interrogation and detainment. I know that mages are going to be hating to play Blink in this dungeon because they don't want to play with Ice Flows because they're all divas. You should be playing Blink in this dungeon. Now, after you finish the first boss, where do you go, left or right? It's kind of an interesting question. We talked about in Priory Sacred Flame last season. Most people on the PTR went left. Now, recently on the PTR, the count in Streets of Wonder did end up getting increased a little bit. So we haven't necessarily seen what the meta ramifications of this kind of thing are. But the reason that people went left first were because the mobs that were on the left side actually gave really good count. There were the Core Hounds, the Nightclaws, and the Direhorns. They were all pretty efficient count. And dealing with them, they weren't really that dangerous. The Core Hounds, they had a Ancient Hysteria cast that would heal them to full. You really needed to just make sure that you kill these mobs evenly and you make sure to kick that cast. The Nightclaws, they were similar to like the Darkheart Thicket Nightclaws. So they put that bleed on you. Just make sure you're DRing that. And then the Direhorn was normally done at the exact same time that you did the Nightclaws. This is similar to the Ataldazar the Direhorn. This is why they made these mobs. They just wanted to bring back mobs from the past. And so they're all pretty efficient mobs. A lot of people ended up going left. I don't really know what the situation is going to be now after they have increased the count in this dungeon specifically. But that's what people were doing in the PTR. But kind of keep your ear close to the ground for whether or not people are going right. If you also go left, there is another mini boss, which is Tracker Zolaros. He has a circle that you must stay in, otherwise it grips you back in. You'll also get the beams dropped on random players, like the ones I was talking about from the Overseers that do the spinning effect. So all of your DPS want to be standing on like the outside, coming from the first boss area, and continue to slowly like shimmying that mini boss a little bit forward. That way you can make sure to continue to move, not get hit by the beam, and not die off to this mini boss. There's also this neat skip where you can skip some of the RP on the menagerie by walking into the door here. That basically tells the game that you have contacted inside the room, and it will start the RP to be able to looking to summon the menagerie boss. But then you're going into the boss pretty quickly. And the menagerie boss is 3 bosses. Additional bosses spawn once the previous one hits 50% HP. There's also a global mechanic, which is called Gluttony. It's a debuff that jumps to the nearest target, and it persists throughout the fight. The first boss is Alcrux. He grips you in, and he puts circles on the ground. He's actually not that dangerous. You can die to the circles if you're not fast enough. I actually have seen even like high level players, if you're not using like movement speed effects or you're not moving immediately after those circles on the ground end up expiring, you can die. So you got to watch out for that. Second boss is the Golem. His name is Ashalite, and his mechanics are probably some of the most important of the fight. He does pulsing balls out of his body occasionally with an ability called Venting Protocol. These balls can be picked up with the Gluttony ability. So this is where the Gluttony ability comes into play. And it gives you a massive damage amp. It gives you 5% per stack, all the way up to 20 stacks for 18 seconds. And whenever these mobs die, for Ashalite, he continues to do his Venting Protocol ball summoning. And what you should be looking to do is you should be looking to kill him on a wall or in a door frame and utilizing the terrain of the room to try to keep the balls like stuck in the corner. That way somebody can walk on top of those balls and just pick up 20 stacks immediately, and just they'll be cranking an insane amount of damage. You should be looking to try to pass this Gluttony ability to whichever DPS has their cooldowns, and honestly is kind of defensively minded. You really don't want to have it on somebody who's like relatively squishy, because it can actually be a decent amount of damage taken. So bouncing the Gluttony to people who have their offensive CDs available, that's very valuable. Third boss, Vinza Goldfuse. Oh, I also didn't talk about this, but after Vinza Goldfuse spawns, you want to kill Ashalite off all the way to 0. You don't really want to have Vinza and Ashalite up at the exact same time. It can be a little bit tricky, so you really want to just make sure that, kind of similar to Lizard Council and Aberrus, that you end up killing off that boss as fast as possible. The third boss, Vinza Goldfuse, she's not really that hard. She has a Whirling Annihilation ability, which is it's like a very strong suck. And if you end up getting caught in the circle, you end up just dying. It's pretty difficult to run against it. You need to probably be 20 yards away from the boss whenever she starts to cast that. The other mechanic that she has is Chains of Damnation, which is a root that must either be killed or it can be, freedomed off. Hunter Pet, Freedom, Shapeshift, those kind of effects to be able to get off of it. Alternatively, you really want to make sure that you're close to melee if you're getting targeted with Chains of Damnation. That way, actually, it's not even a root. I have it in this notes that it's a root. That's actually not true. It's a 100% slow. So if you're a shaman, you can Ghost Wolf and run around with it. I don't really know what the effectiveness of this is if you get caught out in the middle of the room, but there's a very small differentiation there. Like warlocks can end up porting out of it if they shadow burn their port. So I know that I said that was a root. It's not a root. It's 100% slow. Sorry. Secondary trash. So the secondary trash is actually fairly simple. It's got Peacekeepers. These are mobs that will dash targets at range. So what you really want to do is you want to have all 5 players stacked in a melee anytime you pull a Peacekeeper. They also have a shield mechanic, kind of similar to the Footman and Priory Sacred Flame, that have a 75% DR, but these shields can be CC'd to cancel their casts. There's other mobs in this area, but the only other one that's kind of important is the Enforcer. So the Enforcer has a knockback Tank Buster. Don't get knocked back into another trash pack. I can only plead with you to get knocked back into a wall. And it has a 20% AoE enrage that will enrage a bunch of trash mobs. So depending on what your tank situation is, whether or not your group is being diligent about standing in melee with these Peacekeepers, what's actually kind of going on, it can be decent to pull the Enforcer with a bunch of trash mobs. Just really watch out, since it is that AoE enrage that we're kind of talking about. In the past, that made the mobs take bonus damage, but that's no longer a part of their mechanic. The Postmaster trash room, the mail room, mostly tank damage. A lot of these mobs don't have insanely difficult mechanics. What you tend to want to do is you want to pull out a lot of the trash out of that room and kind of deal with it in the open area for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, it's trying to get these mail elementals stacked up. These are caster mobs that cast like a random bolt on the players. It doesn't really do an insane amount of damage, particularly given the context of what the pack is. The pack isn't doing like insane amounts of DPS to anybody. So make sure that you're able to get those mobs kicked in. That's why you're looking at LOS it. There's also another mob called Sorters, and they try to open up the chicken cages, and these chicken cages will stun the entire party, and it's the most obnoxious mechanic I've ever seen. So you really want to make sure you're CCing them if they're trying to open up a cage. Alternatively, this is completely dealt with easily if you just pull the trash pack out of the boss room. Okay, so the Postmaster, he's got a couple of main mechanics. Money Order is an AoE soak. This is a AoE soak that can be bopped. Immuning this isn't particularly bad, especially whenever you have the fan mail going off. The fan mail is a mass AoE heal check. You should be looking to press some DRs whenever this fan mail is going off. If it happens where it lines up with like Money Order and fan mail, either one right before the other one at the exact same time, there's like some weird sequencing. Those are when you want to be pressing your immunities or potentially your bop. But if you're a healer, watch out for that. It's a massive AoE heal check. The final mechanic is Unstable Goods. Briefcases basically fall from the sky. You need to throw them into the open mail chute. You can throw them onto other people and daisy chain the throwing. There are circle soaks on them, but they leave a nasty dot. They can be dispelled. Like you do want to soak some of them, or like have a tank soak some of them. You can Also, if you have like a Mass Dispel, you can maybe get like the first set, you can get a bunch and just Mass Dispel it off. It's not something that you want to soak a bunch of these circles. But if you get a bunch of puddles in the middle of the room, it can also be kind of annoying because then your tank has to go and pick up all the briefcases that are under those puddles. You'll figure out how to play this. It's pretty intuitive. Mize's Oasis. Mize's Oasis is a little bit different than it was back in Shadowlands. You buy an item near the NPC that's near the door to be able to start the event. He's like a cartel member. He's not the guy that you get the password to. He's like front left of that. And you end up taking these items to each of the NPCs that's lit up on the minimap. So you take the item that you buy from the first NPC, and you look at your minimap, you see like a circle icon. You walk out to that mob, you deposit that item to that mob, and he summons trash, and then he drops another item. So whenever he summons trash, there are specific mobs that you kind of need to know what they're doing. There is one mob that is I believe it's the Sentry, that will fixate onto players that have the goods, the cartel goods that you're trying to deliver to each mini boss. This means that the tank should be running the cartel goods over and over and over. Sorry, the mobs are enforcers, I think is the actual name of the mobs. And so you end up needing to deliver 3 rounds of goods and kill off all the trash to be able to get the password. Once you are able to kill off all that trash and get the password, then you're able to get the Mize's Oasis encounter started and the RP of that started as fast as possible. But what you really want to do is have your tank continue to pick up the goods and run them to the next vendor over and over again, because that is the fastest way of dealing with this and getting the trash spawned ASAP. Mize's Oasis. Mize's Oasis, the instruments do different things, but the general premise is the same. You're using your instruments to be able to get to 10 stacks of the smiley face debuff to get the frowny face debuff, and that gives you a massive damage amp. In general, tank has been assigned to vocals historically, and healer's been assigned to drums historically, just due to kind of what the mechanics of the fight are. Basically, you're trying to jump through ground effects. And like I said earlier, once you get 10 stacks of your buff, you get a massive damage buff. After 2 waves of trash, like you should use, like once you pick up your thing, like I think the French horn dashes you forward. There's some ability that like shoots you up in the air, and you should be able to see how these circles spawn. But by picking up the circles, then you get the damage buff. So walk in the middle of them, press your extra action button, and then you get the damage buff. After 2 waves of trash, then the boss shows up. He'll try to suck you in, and around 70% of the way through his suck-in cast, he'll also spawn circles underneath your feet. So you should be aware that that's going to be happening, so you can actually extend your buff. Failure to extend your buff is actually going to make for a much harder encounter, and honestly, it's just so much slower if you don't really get that 2 to 3 second window to be able to extend your buff in. In addition to that as well, he puts up a massive shield on him. You have to kill the shield off in order to be able to take less damage. This was a non-trivial shield on the PTR, and frequently we had to use pretty large DRs to be able to survive that one shot from that shield going off. Save offensive CDs for that. It's pretty dangerous. So after Mize's Oasis, we only have the last boss, and something that I did talk about earlier, or I didn't talk about, is Commander Zofar, who is a mini boss that guards the final area. You can skip this mini boss. If you see on screen right here, we jump around the right side, we jump up to this little ledge, and then we click the console without getting too close to Zofar, and that allows you to skip this. Blizzard, if you're watching, you're legally required to type in the comment section that you are a cop. I've asked, if you're a Blizzard employee, you must admit that you're a Blizzard employee. Those are the laws. You're also not allowed to fix this. Those are the rules. Final boss, Sazami. Couple core mechanics. I think the most flashy one is the divide mechanic, and going to the right spot is like the core of the fight. She also does these rings that pulse out from players. So you need to be able to identify where the safe spot is with the divide and how the divide is orienting the room. You'll basically just go through these shapes to be able to drag the boss to specific places and make sure that you're not going to be getting hit by the wave. If you get hit by the wave, you're going to die. That dot is nasty. There's also another nasty dot that is from Phase Slash, and that gets put onto players. I noticed in the PTR that it can be LOS'd. I don't think this is potentially useful knowledge. Maybe somebody can cook with this, so I'm just going to throw that out there into the world, that for some reason you can LOS the Phase Slash dot. You can. I think the reason is because you can LOS it over walls, and you don't want to be like LOS of your healer whenever you get hit with that Phase Slash dot, because there's not really much recourse. But there's maybe a way that you can tank the boss that you don't end up getting hit by it that I haven't really thought about. So there's maybe something there. Final mechanic that you really need to know about is double technique. At 33 and 66%, Sazami will port to a specific spot and start casting a like 10 or 15 second long ability called double technique. You must kick the boss twice. Basically, you kick it kind of late the first time, and then you kick it as late as possible in the second cast. That allows you to go through the fight with fewer and fewer mechanics just in general. Next up, from the Shadowlands remapped dungeons, we got Halls of Atonement. So the way of activating the first boss, Halkias, is fairly simple. You need to kill off 3 shards of Halkias to be able to get the boss activated. The route that people largely played on the PTR was we were going to be first pulling this left side shard of Halkias that you can see on screen here. You pull all the way to that mini boss with Bloodlust. Then people would backtrack to the far right shard. Then people would go through the middle where Halkias is, where he spawns, clearing out some of the trash through that middle wing to make sure it's not in your way for the boss. And then they made it to that front left shard. That's kind of the general route that people ended up playing. Maybe there's a cook that's better. That was the easiest route that players ended up playing during the course of the PTR. So the first trash area, let's talk about some of the mobs that you have to deal with. Gargans and Houndmasters, these mobs are tied together. Gargans apply an insanely hard-hitting tank bleed that can stack. Houndmasters, they have a shoot ability and a cast that they cast called Loyal Beasts. Loyal Beasts is an interrupt, and if it goes off, your tank will not be long for this world. Basically, they end up enraging the Gargans. The Gargans then can't be CC'd, and they beat your tank into the ground. Just immediately, they pummel him straight into the dirt. So you have to make sure that you're kicking the Houndmasters. It's not really much of a choice. You can CC the Houndmasters if for some reason you don't have a kick available, and they'll recast their Loyal Beast. Make sure it gets kicked. That's the only thing that I can really say. We have other mobs. We have the Obliterators and we have the Collectors. So the Obliterators, these are the X-Bolt type of mobs that will target random players. They also currently target pets. I wouldn't be shocked if this gets changed in the future with a random bolt cast. If this goes off at the exact same time that the Shard of Halkias is doing its Thrash AoE, you can have players go out and die. They also have a Dispel, a magic damage Dispel that must be dispelled within 12 seconds. Otherwise, it does a decent amount of AoE damage. It doesn't like one-shot you or anything, but if it happens in conjunction with any other abilities going off at the same time, such as the Thrash from the Shard or one of the bolts contacting your players, that can happen where it ends up killing you off. These Obliterators normally spawns in packs of 2 or 3 with the Shard of Halkias, so they're always present whenever they are on top of that mob. The other mob, the Collectors, they have an ability called Siphon Life, and it is a channeled ability where it will put a dot onto players. It ticks pretty frequently. All you have to do is basically make sure you stop that, or you can potentially kick it as well to stop that Depraved Collector's Siphon Life cast. There's other mobs here. They're called Slashers, which are the Gargoyle mobs. These are the Venthyr mobs from the past. You can no longer use the Venthyr ability on them, unfortunately. The Venthyr ability was OP, but let's go on. They have an ability that's notable. That's an interrupting shout that does a lot of AoE damage. I am probably voted as my superlative as most likely to get locked out by this mob. This mob is sneaky in terms of locking you out. I would make sure that you put like a sound attached to whenever it's casting the interrupting shout ability, just to make things a little bit easier for yourself. Final mob that's in the first area that you need to know about are the Toiling Groundskeepers. These mobs flee at 30% HP. Make sure that you're looking to CC them. Effects like Binding Shot, Ursul's Vortex, Ring of Peace, excellent at dealing with them. Just make sure that you also position yourself to where these mobs will not pull other packs. If these mobs accidentally body pull other packs, this, unlike, we talked about Gambit earlier, these mobs, unlike the mobs in Gambit, if they pull anything else, you're probably going to be wiping immediately. Really, really tough. Watch out for these Groundskeepers. These have caused a lot of wipes in the PTR. Okay, first boss, we have Halkias. His mechanics are fairly simple. Basically, make sure that you stay inside the circle. Otherwise, you're going to be feared forever, eternally. Always feared. So make sure you're always inside the circle. Also, at 100 energy, the boss does a spin cycle cast where he'll spin for a little bit. Then, after a certain period of time, he has a chance to swap directions. He doesn't always swap directions. He has a chance to swap directions until the end of the spin cycle. So watch out for him. He's broken a lot of people's ankles. He's looking like Prime Kobe here. Then the second area trash, not really a lot's going on with the mobs there. There's a lot of mobs that do a decent amount of tank damage. You're kind of familiar with the decent amount of mobs that you're seeing in the second area. The ankle biters, though, they'll leap onto random players, and they do a lot of group-wide damage. Beyond that, it's just like the slashers doing a large tank hit. So watch out for the ankle biters. I think that any CC effect on the ankle biters is actually fairly solid. So really, really just be careful about those kind of mobs. Next up, we have the second boss, Echelon. He spawns Castoraz that must be killed off. These are like these imp mobs. They're actually kind of hard to get stacked because they spawn really far from one another. So things like Avenger Shield, Silent Sigil, A-Bomb Limb, Mask Grip, Sigil of Chains, all very, very good for dealing with these kind of abilities, with these kind of mobs. And whenever they die, they blow up for, I would say, a medium amount of DPS. If you end up killing off 6 at the exact same time, you're probably not going to die 100 to 0. If for some reason you have multiple waves up at the exact same time, say you have 12 up at the same time, you're probably going down unless your healer pops a DR for your group, your healer is healing the hell out of your group, or you personally pop a DR. So the main mechanic on this fight, though, is an ability called Turn to Stone. One player is targeted with the Turn to Stone, and Halkias will leap onto them. He puts a circle on this player as well. You need to make sure that you're pre-positioned underneath where the imps are dead. That way, because you get a really fat slow on you, and it increases the amount of slow rather quickly. I think it starts at 50%, and it moves all the way up to you getting stunned whenever after 3 seconds. And so you have to be stacked on top of these imps. Then Halkias leaps on top of you, and it puts a really hard-hitting dot on you. He does stun you with 2 seconds remaining on this debuff duration, and he'll also stun anybody else who's inside the circle. So if you don't have the circle on you, you need to peel out as fast as possible, get away from these imps. So put a strong DR on yourself as well. Priest, notably with some secret jutsus, aka life grip, they can life grip you out of the leap if they are not the person who is stunned. And after you kill off Echelon, it's just a couple of trash pulls and 2 bosses that separate you from victory. High Adjudicator Elise, the 3rd boss of this dungeon, is pretty demonic. So this boss is a lot more difficult than it was back in Shadowlands, where the ghosts are a lot more integral of a mechanic. The ghosts spawn, and you end up having to drag them to a lantern. After the 4th lantern is hit with a ghost, then one lantern is going to respawn right at, or maybe even like right before the next ghost is going to be looking to spawn. You should be quickly identifying where that ghost is, where the ghost is coming out of the middle of the room, and then where the lantern is. If you don't know what to do, just start in the middle of the room. The ghost no longer does that proximity damage onto players. It's just hitting you like it's always doing the proximity damage. So start in the middle of the room if you're not really comfortable moving quickly, and then just make sure that you don't make a mistake and walk that ghost to the wrong spot. Because as the ghost persists, it starts ramping the damage, and after a certain period of time, it's kind of like Candle King, where if you have 7 wax statues up, it's unhealable amounts of damage. If that ghost ends up living for 15, 20 seconds, your healer's not able to heal that. It's not really a thing. Other mechanics are on this fight. There are debuffs that go out on the random players that I would describe to use a medium amount of damage. There's also a bolt that is targeted on the tank. You should be looking to kick this, unless your tank has spell reflect up, which in that case, don't kick it at that point, but kick it at all other instances of time. Then we got the Moonkip pull. Inquisitor Cigar. Vinthir ramp this, as we say back in the Moonkin community. So Inquisitor Cigar is a little bit different than what was back in Shadowlands. There's a 30% damage amp that is occasionally applied to your character, where you're able to do a little bit more damage. Inquisitor Cigar heals based on the HP of the ads in his room, and he only, I believe, sucks like 6 or 8 at this point in time, as opposed to the entire room, which he used to do in the past. There are 2 ways of trying to deal with him. First and foremost, there's trying to Zerg him, or the second way is killing off all the ads. You tend to want to kill off most of the ads, and then after he ends up doing that absorb cast on all of the ads, he will summon additional smallies that fixate onto players. These mobs, for some unknown reason, melee incredibly hard. So watch out whenever you're getting targeted by these fixated ads. Be looking to throw individual CCs on them, stuns, group stuns, Ursul's Vortex, that kind of thing, to get them the hell away from you. Typhoon, Blast Wave, Explosive Trap, those kind of things. Get them away from you. Final boss, we got Lord Chamberlain, and he's fairly simple. He's got a couple of core mechanics, but the most important mechanic is dodge statues. Also, do not let these statues collide with one another, because they do bonus damage if they do come in contact with one another. So really make sure that you're using the geometry of these statues and where they could potentially be going, and have forethought about your own personal positioning to make sure these statues don't contact one another. There's also large circles. I don't know if I need to say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. Get out of circles. Don't be that guy and get hit by them. At 33 and 66% HP, the boss will also jump into the middle of the room and try and pull in all of the statues with the statue telekinesis. He throws them out away from his character. Do not let then the boss tries to beam them. Do not let the boss contact them with a beam. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to put yourself in between the statue and the boss, and you're going to be taking a decent amount of damage from this beam. Now, if you are close enough to the boss's hitbox, you're actually able to soak multiple beams at once, depending on your own individual positioning. In theory, in the past, we had tanks soaking multiple of them at once. If you're in a pug, like, I wouldn't trust my tank to do anything. If he gets the hitbox of the boss and he's soaking 2 beams at the same time, fantastic. That's awesome. Great for him. I would not trust a pug tank to do anything, so I would be looking to make sure that I'm always doing my part here. Next up, we have a dungeon that's new to this season. We have Ecodome Aldani. There are a lot of landmine mobs in this dungeon, similar to Floodgate, if you guys remember that from last season, where there are mobs that you should pull and the mobs that you shouldn't pull. And we're going to talk about the mobs that you should and shouldn't pull. pretty frequently. Actually, most of the mobs that you should pull, they're not listed, and the mobs that you shouldn't pull are listed, which is kind of funny. First area, there are mobs that you need to know about. Most of the mobs that are in this first area don't really do much. There's like mites that randomly leap on people, but they don't really do too much. There are specific mobs that do matter. First and foremost, there are overgorged mites, which are not, they're different than the mites I was talking about earlier. They have a bursting style effect on death because we couldn't get enough of affixes, so they had to bring them back. Rest in peace, bursting. There's also a Ravenous Destroyer that's in the first area, and he puts a beam on random players. He can be kind of annoying, and that beam does a lot of damage. Make sure you're looking to DR it. Maybe healer. If you're a healer here, slam an external on somebody if they're getting targeted by the Ravenous Destroyer beam that's on people. Those are the two mobs that are probably the most important in the first area. Then we got the first boss. The first boss is fairly simple. The premise is do not let the mites contact the boss. Make sure that you're killing off the mites as fast as possible. The mites will leap onto players, and the boss will summon 2 waves of mites per 100 energy, where there are 3 spawn points for these mites. So basically what you just do is you kind of stack up, and then you can press AoE CCs to make sure that they just like stop leaping for a couple seconds, and they make it a little bit easier to kill off. Specs with large upfront burst DPS are really, really good for dealing with these mobs. Marksmanship Hunter, I think, is a specialization that is especially good at dealing with them. Then, at 100 energy, the boss will summon 2 sets of mites that will slowly walk towards the boss. If the mites contact the boss, they'll heal the boss for 5% per mite and make him do 15% bonus damage in the stacks. This doesn't wipe you immediately. This isn't like first boss of Ara-Kara, but it's unacceptable. I think that you guys pretty much understand that it's unacceptable. Also, the mites that spawned previously and that will leap onto players, the boss can eat those as well. So that's why they have to be killed off ASAP. Second area, we got the Sentinels, which these are demonic mobs. The Sentinels are probably the hardest hitting mobs in the dungeon. They start with the shield, and whenever the shield is broken, they do a pulsing AoE on 2 random people, and they drop ground effects underneath your feet. And the pulsing AoE damage that they do is just otherworldly, just how much damage that they do to them. So you should try to skip as many as possible. I think we tend to only play like 2 per dungeon in like a high key route. And you can see us like walking around some of them here, really just trying to be very diligent with our movement and not trying to skip as many as possible here. Runestalkers, these mobs are kind of similar to the Inspectors from Floodgate, where they'll port behind you and they'll try to cast a beam on you. They don't do anything else besides that. They're not doing like any initial damage. The Farstalkers, these are similar to the leaping mobs in Theater of Pain, where they'll leap onto players, and that leap itself is a cleave, so you want to stay loosely spread from the remainder of your party. They also have a Chain Lightning style cast that must be kicked. Otherwise, that Chain Lightning just does a billion damage to your group. All right, second boss. It's a Lizard Council fight. It's got Agira Javelins. You want to Venn diagram these Javelins. Do not stack up with somebody else. You need to kill these Javelins ASAP because they have a stacking dot that persists onto players. Really strong burst AoE specializations. I talked about them for killing off the mites. Strong AoE 3-target burst that can cleave off of these Javelins and kill them off as quickly as possible is incredibly important. There's also beams that are on this fight, and they go by the same name. They're Warp Strikes, but they're 2 different types of Warp Strikes. The first one is from the main boss. They're both from the Lizard, but like the way it interacts with the game is a little different. The first Warp Strike is from the main boss. It puts a dot on whoever gets hit by it. If you get hit by the Warp Strike at the exact same time that you have the Agira Chain Javelin thing, you're probably going to die. That's why, and the timing on the Warp Strike hitting you is pretty quick. So that's why I'm really emphasizing the fact that you need these Javelins killed off. So that first Warp Strike puts a dot on whoever gets hit by. It can cleave people who are in the path of it. Once the Lizard hits 100 energy, the Rider dismounts the Lizard and ports to a very specific location. The Rider has a 99% DR on him, and the Lizard's casts 6 Warp Strikes, and the boss has 6 stacks of his immunity shield on him. You have to charge these 6 Warp Strikes through the boss. The Warp Strike I would describe it as loosely baited off players, so you should spread out in order for you to more easily not get hit by somebody else's beam. If you end up taking a second stack of the Warp Strike dot, you're probably going to die. This is the point in time where you want to be pressing your defensive. If you're a healer, you should be looking to press your massive healing, drop a Spirit Link Totem, those kinds of really strong group-wide cooldowns, because your noob DPS are going to cleave one another, especially early on. So once you get 6 beams through the boss and the Lizard are both stunned, and they're able to take damage simultaneously for 15 seconds. In theory, you would expect the boss to be taking bonus damage, but That's not how that works. The bonus damage is the fact that you're able to cleave the lizard and the boss at the exact same time. So some specs, like Marksmanship Hunter, get owned, idiots, are not able to cleave 2 targets there. Then there's the final trash area. So difficult mobs in the section. There is the Burrowing Creeper. The Burrowing Creeper is like Bubbles, where he's got this AoE dot cast that goes on to players. He also has Earth Shatter, which is a massive AoE hit. The general sequence is like the first thing that the Burrowing Creeper casts is the AoE dot, and then he immediately casts it into the Earth Shatter. So if you do pull a Burrowing Creeper, they're actually not that bad considering the fact that you have other stupid mobs in this dungeon. But the Burrowing Creeper is not that bad, but you have to live this Earth Shatter hit that happens right after the first AoE dot. Then, after that Earth Shatter happens, there is an Upheaval cast, which is like a single target nuke effect where he puts a circle on the players, he burrows on the ground, and he knocks them up in the air. It's not as bad as like the Earth Shatter hit. So, but the Burrowing Creeper, pretty dangerous. If you play it with other mobs, like the Leaper mobs that we kind of talked about earlier, that do damage to you, you can die to the Burrowing Creeper. So it's generally seen as like a mob that you play with the other Scarabs that don't have any mechanics. That's kind of the read on the Burrowing Creeper. The other difficult mob in this end section is the Pact Speaker. It's like a League of Legends character, except it's a World of Warcraft mob. And it has 4 abilities like a League of Legends character. It has a massive AoE, pulsing AoE hit. It has a bolt ability that casts onto random players. He also shields himself periodically. And then you need to kill an ad that gets summoned off of this Pact Speaker. Now, the ad... whenever the boss has that ad available, he's trying to drain the energy off of that ad, and he's shielding himself simultaneously. So you must target swap to this ad ASAP. I know there's 2 Pact Speakers right in front of the last boss. If you pull them together, you're going to wipe. Do not pull them together. This is your warning. You can pull the patrol into one of the Pact Speaker packs. Do not, under any circumstances, pull the 2 Pact Speakers together. You are going to wipe unless they get nerfed. If they get nerfed, all right, we can reassess. If they do not get nerfed, do not pull them together. Okay, now less difficult mobs that are in the end section. Everything else is kind of whatever. I don't even know why I have notes for that. All the other mobs in the end section are kind of whatever. There's like an elemental that puts a shield on like a low health target. Most of the mobs are still the far stalkers still leap on people. There's ritualists that cast bolt onto people. Nothing else there is like that dangerous. The Pact Speaker and the Burrowing Creeper. Be warned, those mobs are dangerous. Okay, last boss. The last boss is actually pretty annoying. So basically the general premise of this fight is you're supposed to soak the ghost replica of your character. Also, every ability pulses AoE on your group. It is imperative that you have these people stopped. And you can see on screen here, I'm drawing this diagram right here. And basically what you should be looking to do is you should be looking, whenever you're going into the intermission, you also get more ghosts and the boss is pulsing for AoE. But how these ghosts spawn is a static location where you see right here, it spawns on this far side first. You must go soak these ghosts. So one thing I didn't say about the ghosts is if they end up getting hit by any ability, by the beams on the intermission or the targeted ground effect beam, they end up blowing up. The circles don't end up killing them off, but you tend to want to pick them up before the circle goes off for other reasons, but it doesn't really matter. But the intermission, the ads spawn in static locations, and the order in which you should pick them up is static as well, where you go counterclockwise, grabbing the one that's on the far side first, then moving that to that one that's front left, and then moving to that one that's far right. If you're able to do that, first off, you're able to extend your buff as long as possible, giving you a damage amp for a prolonged period of time, and it makes sure and guarantees that your ad's not getting hit by any of these ground effects. If they end up getting hit by any of the ground effects, you end up getting the nastiest dot on planet Earth on your character. It'll probably do like 200% of your HP over the course of like a 6 or an 8 second dot. So you really just have to watch out. Make sure that you're picking up your ghost over and over again. Everybody has messed this up. Like if you mess it up the first time you see it, don't worry about it. Everybody's messed it up. Just try to learn and figure out the cadence. The Terrathal pack also has a really good weak aura for telling you when the mechanic is going to explode to make sure that you know how much time you have left before the mechanic does end up going off and killing off your ghost. Okay, moving on to some of the War Within dungeons that are returning. Dawnbreaker. We got differences in Season 1 and Season 3 Dawnbreaker. These are the things that I noticed that are probably the most important. First and foremost, you can't LOS the mini-boss dot anymore. Not that many people in Pugs were doing that, but as a high-key player, LOSing the mini-boss dot was a core part of strategies for many of the mini-bosses. But you can no longer do that. The blueberries no longer have the AoE damage. attached to them, where after 35 seconds they would do just the most ungodly amount of pulsing AoE. They no longer have that mechanic. So you should be looking to try to farm as many of the blueberries as possible. They already gave really good counts, so we played a lot of them to begin with. Now more of them are on the table. There is a ritualist in the courtyard. Do not pull it. Like, this is your warning. Do not pull that mob. The courtyard mobs are completely off limits. I don't know why Blizzard put a ritualist in the courtyard. That killed the possibility of pulling any trash there. Do not pull that mob. Shadow Walkers, they no longer have a tank buster on its charge. Thank God. So those mobs are a lot more reasonable for your tank. And the commanders can no longer be kicked. So they just like shield mobs kind of randomly and do a very light amount of AoE damage to your group. Okay, starting from the beginning. Bloodlust. Where do you bloodlust? Do you bloodlust the first pull or you bloodlust the second pull? You bloodlust the second pull. So all offensive CDs get pressed on the first pull because that first ritualist is demonic. Make sure you're getting kicks on the casters that stand next to that ritualist as well. Do not let somebody die to this first pull. The ritualist does a pulsing AoE tether onto players, and it is incredibly scary. So offensive CDs get pressed on the first pull. Bloodlust gets pressed on the second pull. Focus down the ritualist. Again, you also end up wanting to dispel the seed cast, not the cursed, off of all the ritualists whenever that happens. In addition to that as well, something that I see a lot of groups do is they try to take the trash pack that pre-exists on the boat to the pack that's on the stairs, and then they accidentally pull additional trash mobs that are on the boat. Don't do this. Basically, what you want to do is you want to be as patient as possible. If you let the pack come all the way off the stairs and onto the platform, you're able to get the pack completely gathered immediately. So patience here works a little bit better than trying to be as fast as possible. And then try to not accidentally get targeted by additional mobs on the boat beyond the 2 packs that you are required to kill to gain the dragon riding in Dawnbreaker. So first boss, very similar to what it was in Season 1. Maybe the bolts hit a little bit harder on your tank. For ranged DPS, it is imperative that you make sure to stand at range to not drop the puddles on melee. The boss is incredibly, incredibly difficult to move. It always has been, still is. If you have 3 ranged DPS, or actually 2 ranged DPS, then the puddles will always spawn on those ranged DPS. If for some reason you're playing a really heavy Fizz comp where you're like Mistweaver Monk, Rogue, Ret Paladin, and then a tank, and like with a Marks Hunter, it's going to spawn on the Marks Hunter, and it's going to spawn on one of your melee DPS, and you're going to have a bad time. So remember that, like if you're kind of forming your composition. But as a ranged DPS, your job is very important. Do not stand in melee, ever. At 50% HP as well, you really need to make sure that you don't get hit by the explosion. The hitbox is a little bit bigger than the visual. A couple other things, the heal absorb dispel needs to be dispelled off a player immediately. It does put a pretty nasty dot onto people. In addition to that as well, the beams that happens at the exact same time that a global, like an AoE tank buster hit happens on your entire party. So if you have the heal absorb on you at the exact same time that tank hit happens, you can start to be in a lot of trouble. So watch out for those kind of things. Maybe if you're DPS or you're a healer, that's the point at which you're looking to press a DR. So after we down the first boss, what's next? So we got the second area, and the way that you end up getting the second boss able to be done, it's in theory doable if you have mini bosses available, but there are 3 mini bosses that you must kill. Most routes start with the mini boss that resides inside of the church. That one tends to be the one that most groups are doing. Many routes start with a large front of church pull, or they pull the church mini boss with a trash pack and they kind of like sneak in. Many groups also try to play the tent pack and try to play as many manifested shadows as possible. But starting in advance, you want to go to the church mini boss, and the church mini boss does a AoE fear circle, so you really want to make sure that everybody gets out of that. That tank buster hit is pretty hard, and so kind of deal with that. Tacticians are mobs that are pretty frequent throughout the second area, and they are now probably the worst mobs in the second area. And in addition to that, the courtyard pull is off limits, so trying to farm as many the blueberry packs as possible. Shadow Walker is also pretty reasonable. Dark Casters aren't too bad either. So after you go church mini boss, you end up getting that mini boss killed off. Then you go to the mini boss that is near the courtyard area. It shoots an orb. The orb, whenever you fire it, it has drop off damage. Lots of groups press their bloodlust, the second bloodlust of the dungeon, on that orb mini boss. just to be able to make sure that gets killed off as fast as possible. Then you kind of do an intermediate pull after the orb mini boss because you've expended a lot of defensives, because the orb plus the dot that gets put onto all players by all these mini bosses is incredibly dangerous. So you want to take it a little bit slower, go do a little bit of an easier trash pull, and then you go to Grandma's house as the third mini boss that you're dealing with. And you try to let defensive cooldowns come back up before you engage mini bosses. By doing trash packs in between, it allows all of your offensive and defensive CDs become available. So Tent Pack, really good. Blueberry's really good. Shadow Walker's not bad. Dark Caster's not bad. Ritualist in the middle of the courtyard off limits. Tactician's a little bit harder than they were in the past. So whenever you're looking to route through this dungeon, those are the kind of things that you probably want to know. Second boss is a large cooldown check where group external defensives are very valuable. Mass Barrier, Anti-Magic Zone, Zephyr, all incredibly, incredibly powerful on this kind of boss. Where there are a couple of key mechanics. There's an orb, where the orb, similar to the mini boss orb, has it basically you want to bait it as far as possible. It does drop off damage based on the distance, where there is a maximum damage or a maximum distance that it will travel and do the minimum amount of damage. You want to be shooting it basically down the alley, making sure that it explodes as far as possible away from your players. There's an AoE ability that the boss does, where you want to be pressing major group defenses and group externals. And then the third mechanic that this boss has or adds that the boss summons, which are basically mobs that you kick in CC to make sure that these droplets don't end up getting cast off. Something that's to note about this boss is after the second AoE, the boss will end up going orb. So this is the second AoE happens. It goes orb, tank buster, fine. Adds, okay. Ads here is kind of sketch, but really make sure that you just like pressing your CCs on them to not deal with the ads. Shamans get Season Wins DR from these ads as well, not too bad. Then it goes orb AoE, to where the orb hit happens like 1 to 2 seconds before the AoE starts. So you really want to make sure that you're overlapping incredibly strong personals and potentially group-wide externals. Power Word Barrier is a great place here. A Zephyr, again, Mass Barrier, Anti-Magic Zone. Any of that can get pressed right there, and it's pretty good value. So press every defense on the third AoE. Can't really mess up beyond that. Mini boss. Oh my god, the mini boss got hands. So the mini boss, after you end up killing off the second boss, you fly up to the Dawnbreaker again, and you fight a mini boss before summoning Rashanon. That mini boss has magic damage auto attacks. So if you're a tank watching this, that guy's demonic. He also tends to alternate the AoE on your healer in DPS and not end up selecting the tank. So it'll go like on 2 DPS, then it'll go on the other DPS and the healer, kind of similar to Giesel Gigazap. Sometimes it breaks this sequence and it'll get out of rhythm and start selecting the tank. If it ever selects the tank, then it's just basically completely out the window. And it can select you multiple times back to back, and it actually becomes a lot more dangerous. I don't actually think that's intentional, but it is just how it kind of ends up working. If you end up having that AoE on you, you need to be pressing a defensive or a health potion. Your healer also needs to be aware of who the players who are eligible to getting targeted with the debuff are, and making sure that they are healing the absolute shit out of them, because that mini boss is brutal. Final boss, Rashanon. Rashanon, kind of simple. Throw barrels in phase 1. Make sure that whenever it does the rain cast, that you're pressing defensives on the acidic rain. Phase 2, you really need to make sure that you have light defensives on the spinneret strands that go onto people, and move out of them ASAP. You continue to need to save major defenses for the wave and acidic rain combo. That can happen. Boss dies at 60%, so don't worry about that. All damage to the boss is valuable. Groups tend to press their last lust of the dungeon at the very beginning of phase 2 of Rashanon, whenever everybody's offensive CDs become available. So yeah, but yeah, Rashanon, you have to dragon ride all the way to the boss. Just follow the light orbs. You can do like a skip, like an RP skip if you want as well, to be able to get to Rashanon just a little bit faster. Next up, we got Ara-Kara. And Ara-Kara's got a decent amount of changes from Season 1. The Hulking Bloodguard does a pulsing AoE effect instead of a large singular hit. A lot more reasonable. The pulsing AoE is still pretty brutal, though. Engorge Crawler Poison can stack, meaning Poison Cleansing Totem is better in this dungeon. Extraction Strike from Assistance no longer make the mobs heal. Drones, which were the mobs that were at the very end that would like root your tank in place. The Tank Buster no longer roots your tank. Final boss has fewer poison debuffs going out at once, so Pugs should be a little bit easier dealing with this. I mean, it's not, if somebody's going Cowabunga Surf's Up mode, like there wasn't saving them anymore. They also changed the mob orientation of like what mobs are available. whenever you run it down mid in the end section, that's no longer a hauler. That's instead just a hulking blood guard. So it's the same mob as were a little bit earlier in the dungeon. So those were the changes from season 1. If you know nothing about the dungeon, in the first area, basically getting the first boss spawned is pretty simple. You end up having to kill off 3 mini bosses to spawn them. You tend to want to get a large amount of your count in this first area. There's also a tailoring buff in this dungeon, which allows you to stun mini mobs in this dungeon. It can even be extended with a pressing roar. We did that with Augavoker back in season 1. We even stunned like some of the mini bosses and the hulking blood guards with it. So that tailoring stun is pretty valuable. Having somebody that is a tailor in this dungeon is fairly solid. You can pre-pick up the tailoring buff as well if you want to have that prior to the dungeon opening. Front left mini boss is the one that people tend to go to first. He has a melee kick CD AoE fear. That's his unique ability. All of these mini bosses cast bolt and a frontal conal web cast. Now, something that's actually funny about these mobs is none of them can hit you with the web cast if you're standing directly behind them. Now, the front left mini boss does have eggs behind it. So you can walk behind the mini boss and be fine. But if you step on the eggs, then you're spawning the web ground effect, and the melee DPS are going to be mad because that's where they always stand. And if you're some stupid ranged and you walk back there and you clutter melee, they're mad at you. The mobs can't hit you with webcast if you're directly behind them. So, because spiders don't have eyes in the back of their head, I think is the general rule on that. Middle mini boss tends to be the second one that you end up playing. It is probably the hardest one. It has a large AoE cast that's every 20 seconds or so. You really want to make sure that you're pressing like group defenses, mass barrier, anti-magic zone, Zephyr, those kind of things on that. Really making sure that you're pressing large defensives on these because it does a large portion of damage in 3 or 4 second long cast too. It's not really something that your healer necessarily can heal through, especially once you end up getting up to higher levels. Mini boss on the far right, he tends to be the last one. He's also kind of the easiest. He drops green melee heat-seeking puddles on the ground occasionally. They have better VFX for season 3. With the VFX updates that happened in season 2, those puddles I think probably benefited the best from those. So they're a lot easier to see now. Other mobs that are in the first area that you need to know about are Trilling Attendants. These are your X-Bolt spam caster style mobs. Just really make sure that you're getting kicks on these mobs as often as possible. Other mob that matters in the first area are Engorged Crawlers. These mobs put poisons on players on a CD. Poison Cleansing Totem is incredibly nice for this dungeon. Having a bunch of classes that can end up poison dispelling, I know people hate Aug. Aug Evoker is actually quite good in this dungeon as well because they can cauterize and they can poison dispel. Same with like a Dev Evoker. Yeah, Engorged Crawlers, poison, very dangerous. I had somebody in a run that I was doing earlier get 4 stacks of the poison. I didn't even know it was possible. So really make sure that you're looking to dispel those. First boss, we got Avanox. Avanox is a boss that has 2 main mechanics. Alerting Shrill, which is major group damage over a short period of time. Whenever it does the Alerting Shrill, it summons ads from eggs that must be killed. If they reach the boss, he will eat them and become enraged. This enraged is going to wipe you. A really good tip is to stand outside the boss's hitbox to guarantee that he will never eat the ads. Do not stand on the opposite side of the boss. I mean, this doesn't need to be said, but do not stand on the opposite side of the boss. I don't care if you're a healer, bro, you got to move. As a tank, you really want to make sure that you're pre-moving the boss near the eggs to make sure that your DPS are going to be able to continue to hit the boss and the ads at the exact same time, making sure that everybody can kind of cleave both. It will end up speeding up the boss a significant amount. If a DPS is going to be a monkey and move the ads into the boss, like it doesn't matter if the boss is 100 yards away. You're not going to stop them from being animals. Other effect is the Gossamer Onslaught. It's similar to the Alerting Shrill, where it's like a large AoE hit over a pretty short period of time. It's major group damage, I would say, over like 5 seconds or something like that. It also ends up dropping ground effects on all 5 players. Ideally, this doesn't happen in pugs, but ideally, you should try to stack up and move together in a similar fashion to make sure that your ground doesn't get as cluttered as it possibly can. In a pug, people are just going to be playing FFA and there's like free for all the entire thing. Ideally, you just kind of stack up and play together though. Second area, we got a couple of mobs that matter. Web Mages, Hulking Blood Guards, Assistants, and Sensory Stag Shells. The Web Mage has 2 casts. It's Web Bolt, Volley, and Web Bolt. Web Bolt Volley is a long cast time ability that puts a large dot on your entire party. You can CC it over and over again because it is a long cast time. I think it's like a 3-second long cast. So you can slam stops on it over and over again until you're ready to kick it. Not like the end of the world. Making sure that you lock down the Web Mage and making sure that you're getting kicks on the Web Bolt Volley and the Web Bolt is pretty important. Hulking Blood Guards. These were the mobs I was talking about earlier, about mobs that changed this season. They have a new ability called Locust Swarm, which is a mass AoE hit over the course of 8 seconds. It is it is so much damage. Like, it is 200% of your health bar over the 8 seconds. So make sure you're pressing defensives whenever this is going on. This is not something that you mess around with. Other mobs, assistants. These are the dangerous tank buster mobs. They have extraction strike ability, which is pretty sketchy. And the final mob that I talked about, Sentry Stag Shell. It has an ability called Alarm Shrill. This must be stopped. Like, there's no really much of a choice. This must be stopped. This is the worst case scenario if you don't end up stopping these mobs. You will end up losing the count from the Sentry Stag Shell, which is probably the most efficient mob in the entire dungeon, and it spawns an extra Blood Guard that doesn't give count. So it's like DEFCON 5. Like, we're toast if we accidentally spawn an extra Blood Guard in the middle of our pack. It doesn't despawn either. It's just so over. Okay, second boss, we got Arubzek. He's got a couple casts. He's got Infestation, which is a rotating dot. This rotating dot can be tracked on who will possibly be next on with the weak core. If you have the Terrathal pack, that pack will tell you roughly who the next possible candidates for that infestation dot are. Boss also will charge players once per phase. It will only pick players who are at range. Whenever I say once per phase, that's with an asterisk. Occasionally, for some reason, the boss can spell queue and charging twice in a phase. I don't know what causes it. So just really make sure that your person who's baiting those charges is always standing at range. I think that like mages, Augavoker, Balanced Druid, all really good at kind of baiting consistently with things like Blink, Wild Charge, Hover. Devoker also good at quickly dashing away. So have somebody assigned to be doing that charge over and over again and not getting hit by it. Ideally, just utilizing a movement speed effect. Be looking to dodge it. Eye of the Swarm. So the boss will cast a circle and the tank can move the circle. Everybody needs to be in the circle to be safe. Failure to do so will give you a pretty nasty dot, and you'll probably end up dying to it. Third area, I got drones, which are tank buster mobs that can be pretty dangerous for your tank. They previously would root you in past seasons. It's no longer a thing. There are winged carriers, which are the mobs that fly around in the sky. They leap onto players randomly. Make sure that everybody's ready to enter combat with them if you're the tank, so that one person doesn't get one shot by all the carriers. That's something that happens pretty frequently, is that if not everybody's ready to get into combat with them, and you tag them and they immediately leap and only one person's in combat that's not the tank, they immediately die. They just get hit by like 7 carriers all at once and they just immediately die. There's not really much you can do about it. Last mob is the Blood Overseer. It has a volley cast that must get interrupted that puts a poison on the entire group if it goes off. That will probably wipe you. It's a 20-second cooldown kick cast, so mages and like Augavoker could kick them on CD if you really want to. So, but basically any melee DPS also can kick it. So, final boss, Kikatal the Harvester. Make sure that you spread out to not hit one another with the poison whenever it spawns. It can spawn 3 or 4 poisons onto players. Melee and tanks really need to make sure that they are diligent about their positioning, not hit one another. If you have a poison dispel in your range, say you're like a Balanced Druid, for example, you can just immediately get that poison off of you and try to just take less damage, because sitting with that poison on you does a lot of damage for no reason. And ideally, you don't want to have your healer need to kind of heal you. Other effects on this fight is there's a Cosmic Singularity cast that the boss does that the boss tries to pull all players into melee range. You can leap out of this with things like Heroic Leap, Infernal Strike, Wild Charge, Blink, Shadow Step. The safe way of doing this fight is by getting yourself rooted by the Black Blood. So the Blood Workers, whenever they end up getting killed off, they have 1 HP, and so they die to any effect of any point of damage, even like Living Flame ounces and Halo shit. Whenever you kill them off, they drop black blood on the ground. Walking into it roots you. It's really bad to get rooted before the AoE starts, especially if you have a wave coming at you. But that's the best way of not getting hit by the Cosmic Singularity. You force yourself to get rooted, and then you just sit there as the Cosmic Singularity goes off. Then you CC the black blood, and it removes the root off you. Alternatively, you can kick it, and it removes the root off you. Because if you get rooted too early, there's also another cast that's on the boss, like a web ground effect cast. If you get rooted too early, you can also die to the web. So watch out for that. All right, Operation Floodgate. There's actually not much that's changed from Season 2 about this dungeon. They move some mobs around. There's like a Blood Warper that's away from the box next to Big Mama, so you no longer have to fight that Blood Warper. Great change. Bubbles is also gone. Another great change. Blizzard, 2 really soft balls that they just absolutely crushed. Great work by the dev team on that one. It's largely the same dungeon, so if you played in Season 2, you could probably end up skipping this part. Landmine mobs and landmine packs are kind of the same. Try to avoid Blood Warpers and Snipers. Unnecessary architects and shredinators also kind of stink to pull, but they're acceptable. I wouldn't pull them with other like architects or shredinators. Just like that's like a mob that you do as the focal point of a pull, where that's your major focus. The main thing that you're looking to do in the first area is click 5 boxes in order to summon Swamp Face. And after the pull, first pull on the left side next to that first War Supply cache, groups tend to go towards Demolition Duo as their first boss, just because it allows you to have the Bloodlust at the 10-minute marker for Big Mama. It's not required, but it is quite nice, and that's kind of the meta strategy for what this dungeon is. Now, Demolition Duo, pretty easy. You run over the bombs of the lines. You end up getting a circle on your character occasionally that you can use to blow up these bombs as well. If you end up missing a bomb, you're probably going to end up wiping. It's not always true. I mean, your healer can't out-heal it, but I wouldn't expect to be able to live. The small goblin lady, she also shoots people occasionally. Clothies are in danger on this boss. Like, this boss is very, very dangerous. Demolition Duo. After Demolition Duo, groups normally run towards Big Mama with like 1 trash pull in between. They kind of do some of the demolitionists and some of the soldiers, maybe some inspectors. They do like 1 trash pull in between Big Mama and Demolition Duo, just to try to make sure that they're on time with their Bloodlust on Big Mama. Big Mama, probably the hardest boss in this dungeon. You really need to be AoEing hard on the ads. This is something that, like, as key levels go higher, this fight becomes much, much, much harder. You want to AoE as hard as possible to be able to kill off the ads. You want to kill them right before the DR shield comes up optimally. The boss ends up taking 100% additional damage whenever the ads die, and it goes into that jump start phase where it's pulsing AoE, and that pulsing AoE for your healer is incredibly, incredibly challenging to heal. So make sure you're pressing group defensives. Make sure you're pressing your own personals there as well whenever the boss goes into that pulsing AoE phase where it is taking 100% bonus damage. Also, the drones, they have a cast. If you don't end up kicking those drones on the boss, you're going to wipe. The cast is going to end up killing you off. Okay, so you clicked all the War Supply caches. You killed off Big Mom and Demolition Duo. You end up needing to kill off these kelps, these disturbed kelps that are in front of Swamp Face. Make sure that you press CCs on the Jettison Kelp cast to make sure that you're not taking too much damage. Try to kick their heal. You can purge off the heal dot as well. Master spells, excellent, excellent, excellent for being able to get all those removed at once. Kill it off. We click the bombs. We summon Swamp Face. Swamp Face annihilates bubbles. Amen. Rip Boza. And then you type in party chat, everybody move left, stack on the tank. This is true for everybody except for the healer. Healers should stand on the opposite side of the group and move in parallel to the remainder of the group in order to be able to bait the landslide frontal away from the group, but also just to make sure that you're not going to be in the way. The healer then in that case doesn't have to necessarily dodge the same stuff that the rest of the group does, and it allows the healer to plant and cast. So there are players and they're tethered to one another with 2 vines, and whenever they're tethered to one another, it's the 2 DPS in the tank, or it's the 3 DPS in the tank. They're tethered to one another in pairs of 2, and they're taking a dot from that vine. That dot is over the course of like 18 seconds, and it is a very, very hard-hitting dot. And pretty frequently, once every 30 seconds, Swamp Face does a large AoE hit on the entire group and summons waves on people as well, where you have to dodge out of the way of the waves while being tethered to people. And just, again, the general will continue to move left, so you must move together with these people. Make sure you press any passive healing you have. Nature's Vigil, pretty good. That kind of stuff. I guess all the AG got removed, didn't it, huh? I was supposed to be AG, but AG's gone. Any group externals are also great. You can net mass AoE. Yeah, Swamp Face is pretty tough. Then you jump down into the pipe where Bubbles once stood, and now Bubbles is gone. And there's a couple of mobs that are maybe mad at the very end. There are the jump starter mobs that do a large pulsing amount of AoE. They're not the worst mobs in the world, but they are kind of dangerous. Now, where Bubbles once stood, there are soldiers. And these soldiers, if you notice it earlier on in the dungeon, they put a tank damage, magic damage dot on him that you historically have just dispelled on CD, and it doesn't really matter. Except now it's kind of a little bit tricky because there's 3 soldiers in the pack where Bubbles once was, and there are 2 electricians that are in the pull that's right in front of that. And I don't really know what the best way of dealing with this is. Like, even still, like even recording this now. So the electricians, they put a dot onto players that must be dispelled. If the dot goes full duration, it stuns the players. And so it's like, you need to dispel it. Like, but at the same time, you also need to dispel the dot off the tank. So having dwarfs, very frequently using dwarf on either the tank dot from the soldiers or potentially on that electrician dot on the people. Those are the kind of things that you should be looking out for. All right, we know all that stuff. Diesel Giga Zap. Now we're on to the final boss. It is a pretty difficult HPS check fight where there are 2 mechanics that do large group-wide damage. There's the Giga Zap, which is a dot that alternates between DPS and healers, where it picks 2 players the first time, and then it'll pick the other 2 players the second time. So make sure you're pressing a defensive on that or getting a hell heal out of you. Both are totally fine. And then also, if you are like a class that looks like a bubble or a turtle, something like that, and you get targeted with the initial cast of the Giga Zap, say the boss is targeting you, and you press your turtle, it will try to recast that Giga Zap on you a second time, allowing you to immune both instances of that Giga Zap for you and your partner. And they're legally required to give you gold at the end of the run if you do that. So that's nice. The other AoE hit is Turbocharge, which 5 seconds in the fight, the boss goes into a phase where she's pulsing AoE massively on the group for like 10 seconds. This is where I tend to press 1-minute CDs, like defensives, because the boss is on like a 1-minute cadence, like a hard 1-minute cadence. And just really make sure I press 1-minute defensives on that. Final mechanic really is the Thunder Punch, which is like a pretty massive tank hit. It can be Shadow Melded. I don't know in what instance you would necessarily want to Shadow Meld it, but you can Shadow Meld it if you're in a lot of trouble. Pretty large tank hit, so watch out for that. Also, if you get Thunder Punched and you get knocked into water, you're going to electrify the water and immediately stun yourself. So, all right, last but certainly not least, we got Priory the Sacred Flame, which actually got a lot of changes from Season 1. So the Knights, they are a little bit easier. The Impale Dot is a little bit lower duration. It does a little bit less damage. Sharpshooter is a little bit easier. Pot Shot does a little bit less damage. Left side mini boss is a little bit harder. Dalecry has a new ability where he throws spears. So the first boss, Dalecry, he throws spears and does AoE on the group with them. Ranged, should be baiting at range for this. There's a new checkpoint for the dungeon after Dalecry dies, so you can corpse run the Paladin pull. There's also been the removal of some casters at the end of the dungeons and replaced with Templars. There's also the explosion from the Footmen, casters, and Brawn Pike. They made that light explosion a little bit lower in terms of amount of damage that's taken. All right, so let's bust open 3chest.io and talk about the mini bosses that you face in here. So first off, at the very beginning of the dungeon, you're going to be doing you tend to be doing like a pretty large pull with, let's say, a knight, some trash packs, and then Suleiman. After you end up killing off Suleiman, Chainmail ends up spawning. And Chainmail ends up getting pulled with, maybe a miscellaneous caster and some footmen. Suleiman, he has a Thunderclap ability. Here, he has a Thunderclap ability where he just does a massive amount of AoE. He can actually be very dangerous whenever he is pulled with these packs with the Arathi Knights, because the Arathi Knights have an ability called Impale and the Disrupting Shout. The Impale and the Disrupting Shout are both pretty difficult on their own, and so whenever you're doing it with Suleiman, you get the Thunderclap on top of it, and it's pretty deadly. Next up, we have Chainmail, and whenever she's spawned, her main ability is Lunging Strike, which allows her to dash any random player and then puts a pretty substantial bleed on them. Now, it is a little bit less deadly than it was last season, but it is still relatively dangerous, and so you want to be looking to try to dodge this Lunging Strike if at all possible. Now, last season, a lot of people ended up going left. Now, the meta strat for this season is actually going to be going right, and you are going to be pulling some more knights, some sharpshooters, fewer casters than you had in the past, so it should make this dungeon a lot more consistent. But now you're going to be fighting Damien, and his main ability is Heat Wave, which puts a massive dot onto players. Not the end of the world, but the dot itself is, pretty deadly. And then that means that you fight Emberlins with some remaining trash. She still does that Divine Judgment tank dispel that she had from last season, on top of the fact that she does a pulsing AoE with that Holy Radiance. So both of these mobs, they are doable, certainly with other trash mobs, but you have to be really careful as to what trash mobs you are doing them with, because, again, that Heatwave mass AoE and the Holy Radiance mass AoE, both of those effects are very deadly. This means that you're not killing a minion on the left side. Now, what this ends up meaning for the boss is that Captain Dalecry is done with Tanner Dual Maul. Not too bad. Realistically, you should probably put like a mage or like a 20-second long kick on this Battlecry cast. That will allow somebody to be able to kick Dalecry every single time. Then everybody else should be looking to rotate kicks on Dual Maul. There is a certain level in which these casts from Dual Maul do end up one-shotting people. For most people, this is probably not going to be relevant. There are, for certain groups, whenever you start to push to the absolute highest end, where this can become a problem. But overall, that's roughly what's going to be going on with the mini bosses in this dungeon, and that's how roughly some of this stuff is going to be looking to change whenever you are going right. Just know that you're going to be fighting a little bit more knights, a little bit more sharpshooters, fewer light spawns, and fewer casters. Talk about some of the mobs. Footmen, they have a defend cast. These are completely free count mobs. You really just need to make sure that you stop the defend. Sharpshooters, these are annoying archer mobs that disengage around, and they cast an ability called Pot Shot. They are kind of nicer than some other archers of history, where they'll actually leap onto you. So you really want to be stacked up with the remainder of your group. Knights, they do an interrupting shout that does a large amount of damage. Try to mitigate probably the number of knights that you'll be looking to pull. There's like maybe a maximum of 2. You can actually LOS the interrupting shout as well. So there's maybe something a little bit there where we can be looking to pull a knight with Suleiman as the first pull and LOS the interrupting shout. There's also links, which similar to the mini boss chainmail that we talked about earlier, the links have a cast time on their bleed, and they can be dodged with movement effects. There are specific terrain areas that you can stand on to be able to make sure those links don't leap onto you. So light spawns have 2 abilities. They have Purification Beam, where there's a single target channel nuke onto players, and then once you get them to the 30% HP, they try to kill themselves and heal the mobs that surround them with a burst of light. So you really want to make sure that all of the mobs are out of that circle. All right, let's talk about right versus left. All right, hear me out. Just let me cook for a second. I think that right might be a little bit more appealing now than it has been in the past. Now, so the reason that right is a little bit more appealing is Captain Dalecry and Standard Duel Maul together is actually really not that bad. And so Dalecry, of course, has the Savage Maul where the cat leaps onto people. Dalecry has a kick. Or not Dalecry. Dalecry has a kick and Duel Maul has kick. So you're going to be running a little bit low on kicks. But there's then this Javelin mass AoE where Emberlins in the past would do like a large pulsing AoE, and you have this Javelin AoE at the exact same time. And that can kind of create weird overlaps. In addition to that as well, they buffed Emberlin's magic damage tank buster spell effect. And so I think that Emberlin's on Dalecry is a little bit harder, where Duel Maul now is just like a caster mod that you end up kicking and has the Ember Storm ground effect that you just move out of the way up. And so I think that it's a bit easier whenever you're fighting Dalecry with the mini boss. In the past, you couldn't fight Dalecry with Duel Maul because the Ember Storm happened at the exact same time that Savage Mauling did, which meant that you just committed your battle res, and I was just like, not really a thing. So it's not really a thing. Like, you're just losing people to nothing. So I think that that's one of the reasons that you can actually go right potentially. I also think that the packs and the pack composition of what's actually on the right side has been looking a little bit more appealing, particularly with the nerfs to both the knights and the sharpshooters. So I would just say, hey, maybe cook up a route where you play far fewer casters and you try to go on that right side. I think it's going to be a little bit easier, especially early on for some pugs, to be looking to potentially go right. Okay, so you kill off Captain Dalecry. Let's talk about second area. So the second area, they got Paladins, which are huge heal check mobs with an ability called Divine Toll. There are Devout Priests, which are like random X-Bolt caster mobs, and they also will try to heal occasionally. And there are Templars, which they will pop wings like a Ret Paladin, and they do Insano tank damage. The Paladins are the priority mobs in each and every single pull. Mark one of them with Skull. You and the other DPS are trying to cleave them down as quickly as possible to make sure that your healer is going to be out of the woods. Any group externals, personals, whenever the Paladins have all their stuff going on, is valuable. First Bloodlust of the dungeon is normally on the first pull. Second Bloodlust of the dungeon it tends to be on the pull that's right after Captain Dalecry with a bunch of Paladins. So I'd be looking to ship it there. Second boss, we got Baron Braunpike. Actually, yeah, Baron Braunpike. I was going to say Sir Braunpike, but that's the mini boss. We got Baron Braunpike. He's got a couple of mechanics. He's got hammers, which fan out from people. Typically, how you end up wanting to deal with these hammers is you want to like move the boss across the room. You want to like stack up in a corner with all of your DPS and your healer and your tank, and then the hammer circles spawn. You know they're perfectly stacked. Then you move the boss across the room. The boss then casts Castigation Shield onto players. Okay, so actually cast Sacrificial Pyre before that, and then it will cast Castigation Shield. So before anybody goes and soaks the Sacrificial Pyre, you want to bait the Castigation Shield away from players, or away from the Sacrificial Pyre, making sure that it's not overlapping. Then everybody get out of their Castigation Shield circle. The healer tops everybody. Then the tank and some other players soak the Sacrificial Pyre. The Sacrificial Pyre has to be soaked within 25 seconds. Otherwise, it explodes and wipes the group. Pretty easy, not too bad. Final area. Final area has bonus affix where a lot of the mobs here have an ability called Light Expulsion, where whenever the mobs die, they explode for some amount of AoE damage. The general rule of thumb is you want to backpull a lot of the trash into the hallway to be able to LOS all the mobs in. Now, there are fewer mobs that are in this final section now. They're they're a little bit fewer casters, but you still want to be looking to backpull this trash to make sure none of the patrols will walk into you, and just to get the packs grouped a little bit easier. The mob that you haven't encountered here that's in this final area is Sir Brawnpike. He is a mini boss that is required to be able to summon the final boss and fight the final boss. And he is basically Kajin from Halls of Infusion, where you pull him and he immediately starts doing just 1 billion damage to your entire group. His HPS is pretty sketchy. He spawns with 2 priest ads. You really need to make sure that you're kicking. If any of those casts go off while Sir Brawnpike is alive, then you're going to have some deaths that are on your party. But okay, say we make it through that. That's also typically where your third listed dungeon is. I don't really know why I'm talking about this a little bit later. That's typically where your third listed dungeon is. Say you made it through that. We are on to Priory Merprey. And Priory Merprey, not too bad. She has a couple of main mechanics. The ones that are probably the most important, though, are Blinding Light, which is a mechanic where you have to turn your back to the boss to be able to not get stunned, and Inner Fire, which is a massive AoE hit. She also does end up doing like a beam that you end up having to draw on the ground occasionally. So here's the deal with Inner Fire and Blinding Light. So what most groups ended up doing during Season 2 is they ended up not kicking it. They stopped kicking the boss, which is a little bit unintuitive. But here's the reason. Because if you kick the boss over and over and over again, what she does is she goes into a cast sequence where she casts Inner Fire prior to casting Blinding Light. Blinding Light hits you for probably like 70% of your HP. And so you need to be topped. And it's not like that dangerous. But if you're not topped, then you can die. Now, if she casts Inner Fire right before that, your healer is scrambling to try to make sure that everybody's topped the global before the Blinding Light hits you. And so that's why most groups end up electing to not kick the boss and make sure that Inner Fire happens after the Blinding Light as opposed to before the Blinding Light. Whereas if you kick the boss on CD, then you are running the risk of having people just go down to that combo. And at 50%, she ports to the top and summons these ads called Neophytes. These Neophytes do 5% of their HP per second. They take 5% of their HP per second. So effects like Mass Root, Earthbind Totem, Ursul's Vortex, Sigil of Misery, stuff like that. D&D's slow, maybe. I don't really know what DK spec would have D&D slow and not want it for damage, but like D&D slow, maybe. Ring of Peace on the mobs as they're running up to try to make sure that you don't end up having them walk up to your platform. That's kind of important. By breaking the shield early, you only end up getting 1 set of ads from the Neophytes. If you end up hitting the boss for a while and you end up getting a second set of ads, it's not great, but it's not the worst thing ever. What you should be looking to do is you should be looking to pull the boss. You should kick the boss as fast as possible, pull the boss back to the back wall, and try to slam any additional CC that you have on these Neophytes. These Neophytes cannot be tanked, and they fixate onto players. You shouldn't really try to damage them either. Just CC them. They're going to kill themselves off rather quickly. You just try to not get meleeed by them is just the general rule of thumb. All right. That's it. That's all 8 dungeons that we've seen for this season. For some reason, this went way longer than it has in seasons past, but I hope it's really informative. I hope it helps you guys be the best you can be in Season 3. And if you guys enjoyed this content, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, and make sure you stay tuned for future videos where we cover the most dank tips and tech and tricks and everything else that you might want to ever see for Mythic Plus. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.